There are sort of two reasons for minimal government. One's a liberty argument, that the more you give up of your wealth and your earnings, the less liberty you have, and so you want to minimize government size. But you also want to minimize government size because of efficiency. As Friedman said, nobody spends someone else's money as wisely as they spend their own.
You're the third of 5 children,
right,
of Congressman and Mrs. Ron Paul. How did you come to your political philosophy? Was this dinner table conversation in the Paul household when you were a kid?
Well, in my case, there's probably the argument of nature versus nurture, and I may have had both. And I think we're all born with an instinct, to individualism. We grow up in a family, and even in my family as a teenager, I remember calculating how old I would be in the year 2000 and how I'd be completely independent and able to make my own decisions, stay up as late as I want, eat what I want, go where I want, earn my own money. So I think we all have a little bit of that inside of us, maybe some to one degree or more. But then there's also the nurture argument, in the sense that, I've read most of the free market economists. I am, a student of history, and what I see is that I would really like to see a government that truly is limited, and that our freedom is much more expansive.
Okay, so let's spend a moment considering what's gone wrong. William Vogley wrote a book, Never Enough, on the expansion of the welfare state, and he made this very striking point that from 1940 to 2007, welfare spending grew at an average annual rate of just over 4%, and this is while income is growing at about 2.4%. The point is that for almost 7 decades, year in, year out, under presidents of both parties, under Congresses of both parties, the federal welfare leviathan has continued to grow and grow and grow. Ronald Reagan held back the growth in spending, but even he wasn't able to cut it. Why? What's the political dynamic?
Well, even welfare reform affected maybe 4 programs out of 70 or 80 programs, so it wasn't complete enough. I put it in more personal terms, and I think this is something that can appeal to people across both parties and independents as well, is that if you look like me and you hop out of your truck, you ought to be working. And I think most people believe that. We're now registering, though, more people as disabled than we are employing people, and that's a real problem. But it's a gradual problem. Republicans and Democrats have been complicit in this, but it's growing, 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 and people worry that such a great deal of dependency will ultimately drag us down as a country. And that's where the burden of debt comes in, and I think there really is a burden. But our message is a more difficult one. We need to explain to those who are working class and trying to get ahead that this burden of big government, that all of this stuff that government's offering you really has unintended consequences of dragging the economy down, dragging job creation down.
All right. In March, you introduced a budget that would have eliminated the federal deficit in 5 years. You voted against the budget the House sent over that Paul Ryan put together, because although even as you were voting against Paul Ryan's budget, the press was attacking it as too dramatic, too draconian.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah.
Right. But that would have reduced the federal deficit over 10 years, and Rand Paul said, not fast enough.
Well, I think we're dragging a lot of the party in the right direction. Ryan's first budget was going to balance in 28 years. Now he's come up to 10 years. There were a little bit of unrealistic things. They were going to get rid of Obamacare spending, but he left in the Obamacare taxes. So we really think that we need to change. And I'm for a much more dramatic change than some of the gradualists in our party. I think we ought to just have a flat income tax, 17% personal, 17% corporate, very few deductions. You'd have a lot less revenue. This would not be revenue neutral, but I think you'd see an explosion in the economy as you left all of that money into the economy.
Senator, here's the first instance of a question that comes up again and again and again, listening to you, reading your speeches. What makes him think he's different? And here's the version, the instance right now. Republicans have been pushing for a flat tax since at least 1996 when Steve Forbes ran for president.
But he didn't win. If he would have won, we'd have had it by now. So we need to win.
So that's the point. What makes you think you're different? Do you see, I'll put it crudely, because this is a question that's in the air about you. Is Rand Paul just trying to make a point? Right. And so be it. Let him make a point. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a valid point. Or does he see a political opportunity? Can he actually get things done?
Right. See, I don't think anybody can sit here and say, oh, I am different, I'm going to be the one, I'm the one. That's a little bit presumptuous. However, I would say that there is a route to victory for Republicans nationally without diluting our message, being for something passionately. But I think it takes a twist that's slightly different. You're from out in California. California, we say bluish, it's a blue state.
It sure is.
To bring it back red, you're going to have to attract people different than the standard cookie cutter Republicans been. So I am offering something different. And the libertarian twist of that, I think, has appealed to both ethnic minorities as well as the youth, as well as independents. It's really a message that gets beyond just our hardcore Republican. But it's not antithetical to what hardcore Republicans stand for. But it is enough of a twist that I think it has a chance to resonate in areas where we have not done very well.
All right. Getting to know Rand Paul. Let me just briefly go through a few other issues so people get a chance to know where you stand. Obamacare. This fall.
Against.
Okay, done with that one. But where does it stand? This fall, this thing gets rolled out in a way that finally affects, provisions here and there have been taking effect, but this fall, it'll affect the way millions of Americans purchase their health insurance. Paul Krugman of the New York Times says the big surprise will be how well it works, not how badly, how well.
This will not be the first time I've disagreed with Paul Krugman. What I would say is we've fought many different times, but I'm not giving up the fight. We fought and lost originally in Congress. We fought again in the presidential campaign and lost. We fought at the Supreme Court and lost narrowly, and I think was still wrongly decided. But we're going to have one more fight when the bills come due. Initially, the federal government's going to pay for it because that's free. We've heard we have a printing press up here, so it really doesn't cost anything. But then ultimately, the bills are going to be directed back to state government. And what they'll find is that when you offer people a free credit card to go get health care, that they love it. And so they use it all the time, but then it costs so much, there's not enough money. So then they have to come back and they have to tell you, oh, no, you can't go unless you get, someone's going to have to screen you. They're going to have to ration how often you go to the doctor. And then they'll come to the physician and say, well, we were paying you $20 a visit, but there's too many people coming to see you, so we're going to have to pay you $10 a visit. So they will have to reduce the expenditures, what they pay hospitals, what they pay doctors, and they will also have to limit access, which is another word is rationing. And the state governments, despite all of this, will still face bankruptcy. Not just the states like your state, like California or Illinois, that are in trouble. States that are relatively sound are going to face problems because Medicaid is already a driving force towards insolvency at the state level. So I think there's going to be one more big fight on Obamacare, but it's going to be at the state legislative level.
And when? This year, next
year? As the bills come due. And I think the switching over to the state is 2014, but some of it may be 2014, 2015. In time for the presidential in 2016? I think so. I think it'll still be a hot topic in 2016.
Drugs. The Economist magazine. Senator Paul has called for the scrapping of mandatory minimum sentences for nonviolent drug offenders, but would not legalize drugs.
Right. What I think is that if your kid or one of his friends goes out and gets caught with marijuana, sticking them in prison is a big mistake. So I don't really believe in prison sentences for these minor nonviolent drug offenses. But I'm not willing to go all the way to saying it's a good idea either. I think people use marijuana all the time, lose IQ points. I think they lose their drive to show up for work. A lot of states are going to make the decision, I think, ultimately to legalize.
Sure, right.
I am for letting states make that decision, but I'm not in favor of, and I want to make sure people know that I'm not encouraging young kids to do this, but I also don't want to see young kids who make mistakes be put in prison with hardened prisoners. And I think even when you talk to evangelical Christians and social conservatives, you ask them that question: would you rather see your teenager in your church get counseling or incarceration? Almost everybody will answer counseling.
But when California loosens its laws and comes into conflict with federal laws, you side with California, not the feds.
Yes.
All right. Social issues. Senator Rand Paul, quote, I am 100% pro-life. I believe abortion is taking the life of an innocent human being, close quote. Senator, where I come from out in Northern California, when somebody says he's a libertarian, 98% of the time, he's saying he's a libertarian about that. Right. He's pro-choice, keep the government out of the bedroom.
Right.
And so this is an unusual position, in my experience, for a libertarian to take. How do you square that one up?
What I would say is that there is a primary and fundamental role for government. And the primary and fundamental role for government is to stop aggression of one individual against another individual. So the question comes down to, when do you think someone's an individual? When do you think life begins? And then I think you get more to the heart of the matter is, the real debate is, when does life begin? And I think as you have that discussion, it becomes difficult, I think, to be flippant about it. For example, I'm an ophthalmologist, but I examine babies in the neonatal nursery that can fit in the palm of my hand, 1-pound babies that are alive. I look in their eyes to check against a disease that can cause blindness that can be treated now. But let's say a week before they were, inside the mother, but they don't exist, they're not alive at that point. And so increasingly, later on in gestation, people are somewhat horrified. I mean, people are horrified by this Dr. Gosnell that was snipping the spinal cords of them. They're horrified by people, crushing the skull to get the baby out, a live baby, injecting things into them to kill them. So I think many people towards the end are like, well, gosh, yeah, it's not that much different than the nursery. How can I be that this is just a woman's body and that there isn't another individual there? But it's a tough debate. And I think the Republican Party, when I say that I want to be a libertarian Republican, it is also that we'll have disagreements like this within the party, and there will be people, if we leave the decisions more local to their jurisdiction, I think we can have more of a diversity of opinion within the party and within the country.
Overturn Roe versus Wade and send it back to the states?
Yeah, I think states would be a better area for this.
Gay marriage, Senator Rand Paul, quote, "I believe in the historical definition of marriage. That being said, I'm not for limiting contracts between adults," close quote.
That sounds like me.
It's you. Yeah. There's a reason it sounds like you.
Yeah, and I think that it's the same issue, and I think some people get confused. I stand with the founding fathers on this. Jefferson, Franklin, nobody ever talks about them in marriage. Marriage was always a state issue in their day, and that's the way it was written. We didn't write a lot of things like that into the federal Constitution. In fact, not only issues like that, which don't really involve crime, but issues of crime were all state issues. They didn't really conceive of. There were about 4 different things that were federal crimes under the Constitution, and nobody really conceived of all these things. Now, anytime there's a terrible tragedy, it's got to be a federal law instead of, well, why don't you go to your state legislature, because that's maybe more appropriately where this should be handled.